Her body was rejected for breeding, but a human's love crowned her as queen. The twin moons of Zayara rose high above the violet sky, throwing silver light across the endless towers of the alien city. Inside those towers, the great halls of the breeding council were filled with echoing voices and cold judgment. The Zayari were a proud race, tall and beautiful, their bodies designed by generations of selective breeding. They believed perfection was the only path forward, and any weakness had no place among them. Among the crowd stood a young woman named Lyra, her hands trembling as she waited for her name to be called. She had trained for this moment all her life, waiting for the day when the council would examine her and decide her future. Every Zayari dreamed of being chosen for breeding. It was considered the highest honor. To be rejected was worse than death. It meant exile, shame, and a life of whispers in the shadows. The council elder raised his long hand, his pale eyes staring at her like ice. "Step forward, Lyra of the lower spire," he commanded, his voice booming across the chamber. She stepped into the light, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. Every eye in the hall turned toward her, measuring, judging, waiting to see her fate. The machine scanned her body, bright beams sliding over her skin, recording every detail. The screen flashed with numbers and symbols that only the council could read. Whispers moved through the chamber as the elders frowned, their expressions hard and sharp. Finally, the elder spoke again, and his words cut deeper than any blade. "She is unfit for breeding," he declared, his voice like thunder. The hall gasped, and then came the cruel laughter. Lyra's knees weakened as she nearly fell. Unfit. The word echoed in her mind again and again. Her chest tightened, as if a cold chain was locked around her heart. She wanted to scream, to beg, but her voice would not come. Her people turned away from her, as though she were already invisible. A child pointed at her, whispering to his mother, "She is broken." The council dismissed her with a wave of the hand, as though she was nothing more than dust. Guards pushed her aside, her place already forgotten. She stumbled into the streets of the city, the neon lights glowing against her tear-streaked face. Everywhere she went, she felt eyes upon her, mocking, rejecting. She was not worthy of them, not worthy of life. The night air was cold, and the streets were loud with alien songs and machines. But inside, Lyra felt nothing but silence. She walked past market stalls and shining glass towers, yet all she could hear were the words, "Unfit, worthless, broken." She reached a quiet place at the edge of the city, where the lights faded into darkness and the stars stretched wide above. She sank to the ground, holding her arms tight against her body. Her tears fell like drops of fire, her mind spiraling into shadows. Her people had rejected her, and now she had nothing, no honor, no future, no hope. But then the sky shook, a pod yad. Strange light cut through the clouds, brighter than the moons. The ground trembled as a massive object entered the atmosphere. It was not a Zayari ship. Its shape was too different, too rough, too alive. People in the city pointed upward, fear mixing with wonder. An outsider had arrived. The ship descended beyond the hills, its thrusters roaring like thunder. The council's guards rushed to the scene, their weapons ready, but Lyra was closer than the rest. Her hiding place near the landing site, she stood frozen as the ship lowered itself, dust and smoke rising into the night sky. The door of the ship hissed open, and a figure stepped out. He was not Zayari. His body was shorter, his skin strange, his eyes sharp and alive. It was a human, a traveler from the distant stars. He looked around the alien world with calm eyes, as though nothing here could scare him. The guards shouted warnings, but Lyra did not move. Her heart pounded once again, the same way it had in the council hall. But this time, it was not fear of rejection. It was something else, something new, something dangerous. The human's eyes met hers just for a moment, And in that moment, she felt something she had never felt before. Not judgment, not disgust, but recognition. As if he saw her not as broken, but as alive, her breath caught in her throat. And for the first time in her life, she wondered, could there be someone, somewhere, who might see her as more than unfit? The night was silent, but her heart was loud, and deep inside, she felt that this meeting was the beginning of something that would change everything. The dust had not yet settled around the strange vessel. Smoke rose in twisting shapes, hiding the figure that had stepped out. Lyra's breath caught in her throat as she watched from the shadows. Her people had told her humans were dangerous, primitive wanderers who spread chaos wherever they went. But in her heart, she felt a pull stronger than fear. This human was different. She knew it before he even spoke. The guards of Ziara shouted warnings, their weapons glowing with sharp blue light. "Step back, outsider," one of them barked, his voice cracking through the night. The human raised his hand slowly, showing he carried no weapon. His movements were calm, steady, almost defiant. There was something in his eyes, a fire that made the guards hesitate. He did not bow, he did not kneel. He simply stood as if the world belonged to him. Lyra's people valued only beauty and strength in flesh. But this man radiated something else, strength of spirit. It made her heart ache, because she had never seen it in her own kind. The crowd of Ziari gathered, whispering, and pointing. They saw him as a threat, a wild intruder. But Lyra, standing apart, saw something no one else did. She saw a chance. The elder of the guards stepped forward, his silver armor glowing under the twin moons. "You have no right to land here," he said coldly. "This world does not welcome imperfection." The words pierced Lyra again. The same word they had used for her imperfection. Her chest tightened, and her fingers dug into the dirt beneath her. But the human only tilted his head and gave a small, almost amused smile. "Funny," he said in a voice that carried across the silent field. "Back on my world, we learned that perfection is the death of progress." The guards stiffened, their faces burning with anger. The human had spoken boldly, without fear. And for the first time, Lyra saw her people falter. One of the guards moved forward, ready to strike. But before the blow could land, a sound filled the air, a sound soft and trembling. Lyra's voice. "Wait," she whispered, too quiet for most to hear. Yet somehow the human's head turned toward her, his eyes locking with hers through the smoke. In that moment, she felt exposed, fragile, and alive all at once. The guards turned to see who had spoken. When they recognized her, their laughter was sharp and cruel. "It is only the rejected one," they sneered. "She is nothing. She has no voice here." The words cut her, but she did not step back. She forced her legs to carry her forward, even as her heart screamed for her to run. The human watched her approach, curiosity sparking in his eyes. He saw the way the others mocked her, and he understood. His gaze softened. And when she finally stood within reach, he spoke. "You stood up, even when they told you to be silent," he said gently. "That takes courage. No one had ever said those words to her. Not her parents, not her teachers, not even herself. For years, she had believed she was weak, unworthy, broken. But this stranger had seen her differently, in only a few heartbeats. She wanted to look away, but his eyes held her still, and for the first time, she wanted to believe him. The guards growled, stepping between them. "Do not poison her mind, human," one hissed. "She is worthless, just like you." The human did not move back. Instead, he looked at the guard with a steady gaze. "I don't see worthlessness," he said calmly. "I see someone who has survived rejection, someone still standing, and that is worth more than any shallow perfection." The crowd gasped at his boldness. The Ziari never spoke against the council's judgment. But here was an outsider, defying centuries of law with a single sentence. The air grew heavy, charged with tension. The guards raised their weapons, blue light humming like deadly thunder. And in that tense silence, Lyra made a choice. She stepped closer to the human, her body trembling but her will unbroken. For the first time, she stood against her people. I want to hear what he has to say, she whispered, her voice stronger now. The guards turned toward her in shock. There? Mocking eyes narrowed with fury. The elder spat the words like venom. You would stand with a defect and an intruder? Lyra swallowed hard, but she did not move. The human placed himself slightly in front of her, a protective gesture so subtle yet powerful. It made her knees weaken, not with fear, but with something new safety. The guards advanced, their weapons crackling with deadly light. The crowd shouted for her punishment, their voices rising into chaos. But the human only smiled again, that same calm, dangerous smile. You can call me intruder, you can call her unfit, he said, his voice low, but unshaken. But remember this, he continued, stepping forward as the guards flinched back. Every empire that called itself perfect has already fallen, and those who mocked the broken have always been the first to break. Silence followed his words, deep and thick. Even the stars above seemed to listen. Lyra's heart pounded, her chest rising with breath she didn't know she was holding. In that silence, she realized something terrifying and wonderful. This man was not afraid of her people. And maybe, just maybe, he had come not only to change her life, but to change everything. The night after the confrontation felt heavier than any night Lyra had ever known. The human, whose name was revealed as Marcus, was taken to a temporary holding area under guard, but even as soldiers surrounded him, he showed no fear. He walked like a man who knew the ground beneath his feet belonged to him, not to them. Lyra could not sleep. Her thoughts burned with his words. Every empire that called itself perfect has already fallen. The sentence looped in her mind again and again, like a flame refusing to die. The next day, she found herself standing outside the guarded compound. The Ziyari who passed by looked at her with disgust, whispering sharp words. Why is she here? The broken one still follows the alien, but she did not turn away. Something inside her pulled her closer. The guards scowled but allowed her to enter, curious to see what foolishness she would display. Inside, Marcus sat calmly, his hands resting loosely on his knees. He looked up as she entered, and for a moment, silence stretched between them. His eyes softened, and he gave a small nod, as though he had been waiting for her. You came, he said simply, his voice carrying warmth that filled the cold room. I don't know why, Lyra admitted, her voice trembling. Maybe because no one has ever spoken to me the way you did. Marcus studied her carefully, not with judgment, but with a deep curiosity. You've been told your whole life that you are less, he said gently, but you're still standing. You're still here. That makes you more than most. Her breath caught, her heart pounding painfully in her chest. No one had ever called her more. Not once, not ever. She lowered her gaze, afraid of how much those words meant to her. The guards outside laughed, muttering to one another. See how the rejected one clings to him. But Marcus ignored them completely, his focus only on her. Tell me something, Lyra, he said, leaning slightly forward. What do your people live for? She blinked, confused by the question. For perfection, she whispered, the word tasting bitter in her mouth. For approval, for the chance to be chosen. Marcus tilted his head, his lips curving into a sad smile. Then they live in chains, he said softly. On earth, we live for different things: choice, freedom, connection. She frowned, struggling to understand. He continued, his voice low but steady. We love not because someone tells us who is worthy, but because our hearts decide. We make music to express what we feel, not to prove who is flawless. We build families not out of obligation, but out of care. His words were strange to her ears, yet something inside her stirred. She remembered the way her people had looked at her in disgust. She remembered how the council had discarded her like broken glass. And now here was a man, from a distant star, saying she had the right to be more than a label. It frightened her, because it felt like hope. And hope was dangerous outside. More people gathered near the compound. Rumors spread like wildfire. The human poisons the mind of the rejected one. The council watched closely, waiting to see how far she would fall. But Lyra could not. Stay away. Every night she returned, and every night Marcus told her more about humans. He spoke of Earth's oceans, wide and endless, where waves danced under golden suns. He spoke of forests where creatures sang, not for survival, but for joy. He spoke of human art, messy and imperfect, yet beautiful because of its flaws. She listened in silence, her chest rising and falling with emotions she had never known. He was building a picture of a world so different from her own, a world where imperfection was not a curse, but a gift. But the more she learned, the more danger grew. The guards grew harsher, pushing her back, warning her to stop. You dishonor us by listening to him. One snarled. Her family turned there, backs refusing to let her enter their home. She was becoming an outcast twice over, yet still she returned, drawn by the fire in his words. One night she whispered to him, "Why do you risk this? You could be killed for speaking such things." Marcus looked at her calmly, his eyes steady as stars. "Because silence is worse than death," he replied. "If I stay silent, they win. But if I speak, even one voice can change everything." Her breath shook at his answer. She realized she wanted that courage. For the first time, she wanted to fight for herself. But even as her heart grew stronger, shadows grew darker around them. The council began to whisper of punishment. They feared the human's words, feared the infection of his ideas. And they feared most of all that Lyra, the rejected one, might no longer bow her head. The city buzzed with tension, the people restless. Some mocked her openly. Others began to watch her in silence. Change was dangerous, but it had begun. And as Lyra walked away from the compound one night, her heart racing with Marcus's words, echoing inside her, she knew that she stood at the edge of something vast and terrifying. She had been rejected by her people, but perhaps, through him, she would find a new way, a way that might burn her world to ashes or rebuild it into something greater. The days that followed were restless. Zaira's city streets hummed with whispers, with rumors sharper than blades. The rejected one walked beside the human, and the sight spread like wildfire. Every corner, every market, every tower echoed with their names. Some spat in disgust, some stared in silence, and some began to wonder. The council tried to silence the stories, but stories have wings, and no cage can hold a whisper once it takes flight. Lyra had never walked the streets without shame until now. But with Marcus at her side, she lifted her head higher than ever before. The guards still followed them, their eyes like hawks, yet Marcus walked calmly, as if their blades meant nothing. And the strangest thing happened when people mocked her. He did not let her shrink. He answered them with questions. Questions no Ziari could answer. One merchant sneered, "She is worthless." Broken like a cracked stone. Marcus stopped, looked him in the eyes, and said, "Then tell me, merchant, which stone builds the strongest road, the flawless one that breaks at first strike, or the cracked one that endures the weight of 1,000 steps?" The merchant had no reply. People watching murmured, confused, uncertain. For the first time, some of them turned their mocking eyes away. At night, when the city lights dimmed, Marcus spoke more of earth. He told her of music, how humans sang, even when their hearts were broken. He told her of art, how a child's messy painting could hold more meaning than a perfect sculpture. And he told her of love, not as a transaction or approval, but as a choice of the soul. Lyra listened, every word carving new shapes inside her. She had lived in silence for so long, but his words filled her like rain in a dry desert. One evening, he took her to the highest spire he was allowed to reach. From there, the city stretched out like rivers of light under the twin moons. The towers glowed, the streets pulsed, and yet for Lyra, it all felt hollow. "This is your home," Marcus said quietly. "But does it feel like home to you?" Her lips trembled, and she shook her head. "No," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "It has never felt like home." Marcus's eyes held hers, steady, unshaking. "Then maybe it's not the walls that are wrong," he said softly. "Maybe it's the chains they've built around you." His words sank deep, and her chest ached with both pain and longing. She had been chained by judgment her whole life, but for the first time, she felt the weight of those chains lifting. The people of Zayara watched with growing anger. Some called her a traitor, some called her diseased, but in the shadows, there were whispers of something else. A few began to question the council's cruelty. A few began to wonder if perhaps the humans' words carried truth. The council, sensing the tremor, grew more fearful. And fear always breeds cruelty. One night, as Lyra and Marcus walked through the lower markets, a group of young Ziari blocked their path. Their eyes burned with hate, their hands gripping stones. "You shame us," rejected one. One spat. "You dare walk with him, while we must obey the council." Marcus stepped in front of her, his stance calm, his eyes like steel. "Put down the stones," he said firmly. But the youths only sneered. "You don't belong here." "Human," they hissed. "And neither does she." The first stone flew, grazing Lyra's arm. She gasped, clutching the wound. Marcus's eyes flashed with fury, but he did not strike back. Instead, he raised his voice, so all who watched could hear. "You call her broken, yet you fear her enough to throw stones." He said, "What does that make you?" The crowd that had gathered fell silent. The youths hesitated, their bravado crumbling under the weight of his words. One by one, they dropped their stones and fled. But the shame of their attack remained in the air, thick and bitter. That night, Lyra sat with Marcus beneath the alien stars, her wound bandaged, her heart heavy. "Why do you defend me?" She whispered. "I am nothing here, nothing but a failure." Marcus turned toward her, his voice steady but soft. "You are not nothing, Lyra," he said. "You are proof that their system is flawed. You are proof that strength can exist without their approval. And that makes you dangerous to them, more dangerous than you realize." Her chest ached at his words, a strange mix of fear and pride. Dangerous. She had never been dangerous to anyone. Yet now the idea gave her strength. She looked at him, her voice trembling. "Do you really believe that?" He smiled faintly, his eyes warm. "I don't believe it. I know it." The bond between them grew stronger with every passing day. But so did the storm gathering above them. The council called secret meetings, their voices sharp with rage. "This cannot be allowed," one elder hissed. "She is already rejected, but now she spreads corruption. And the human he dares to challenge our laws, our order." They decided punishment was near, and punishment in Zayara was never. Gentle, yet Lyra did not know of the storm about to break. She only knew that when Marcus spoke, she felt alive. She only knew that when he looked at her, she was no longer invisible. The girl who had been thrown aside, discarded, forgotten, was now the center of a story her people feared to tell. And as she stood with him one final night on the spire, watching the stars shimmer across the dark skies, she whispered to herself, almost afraid of her own voice, "If this is wrong, then I don't want to be right." And in the silence that followed, she felt the air shift, because she knew deep inside something terrible was coming. Something that would test the fragile bond between them. Something that would decide not only her fate, but the fate of her entire people. Morning came like a blade over Zayara, sharp and cold. The city woke to new orders from the council. Louder than the temple bells, edicts flashed on every wall. Every screen, every tower face. No citizen shall approach the human vessel. No citizen shall meet the rejected one in private. No citizen shall speak words that honor the broken. The message ended with a promise dressed like law and shaped like a threat. Violators will be corrected. Lyra read the words with a steady face. But inside her stomach shook. Marcus stood beside her at the fringe of the square, his eyes tracing the crowd. He saw fear, he saw pressure, and he saw a strange new fracture. Many stared with disgust as always, but some did not. Some looked down as if ashamed. Some looked away as if thinking fear was still the master, but doubt had learned to breathe. Guards in silver armor spread through the streets like winter wind. They pushed merchants, they questioned workers, they tore down small signs that said nothing but felt like hope. A child tried to ask a question and was hushed by his mother with shaking hands. The sound of the city changed. It was no longer the hum of markets and traffic. It was the rustle of watched hearts. At noon, drums pounded across the high tower plaza. The council had called a public assembly. The oldest tool of control, banners with the mark of perfection, rippled above the stage. Elders stood in a row like statues, polished and cold. In the center, the high adjudicator raised his pale hand. Bring them forward, he commanded. The words rolled like thunder, and the guards obeyed. Lyra climbed the steps with her chin lifted, her chest tight, but her steps firm. Marcus walked at her side without chains, yet the guard wall made an iron tunnel around him. The crowd pressed. Near the barrier, eyes burning, mouths whispering, some whispered curses, some whispered prayers, some whispered only her name, Lyra. She had been invisible all her life, and now her name moved through the air like heat, the adjudicator's voice, carried with perfect clarity. People of Zayara, a rot has entered our order, he said. A human speaks defiance. A defect follows him, and the weak begin to question the strong. This cannot stand. We will correct it before it spreads. He turned his gaze to Lyra, calm and cruel. You were measured and found wanting, he said, rejected for breeding, rejected for honor, rejected by your peers. Yet you walk with an outsider and claim the right to be seen. Explain this arrogance. Lyra felt the crowd press against her skin like heat. Her throat closed, then opened, then found a voice. I walk because I am alive, she said. I listen because I have a mind. I stand because I am tired of kneeling. A hush fell, heavy and electric. The adjudicator's smile did not reach his eyes. You mistake noise for strength, he answered. You mistake stubbornness for worth. He waved a hand toward Marcus. And you, human, you mistake our patience for weakness. You will leave this world, or you will be removed. Marcus did not bow. He did not flare. He did not shout. He only spoke, and his voice was steady like a lighthouse in a storm. On my world, we learn that power without mercy is a cage, he said, and cages break when the wind remembers its name. You call her unworthy because she does not fit your measure, but a ruler that refuses to bend will snap. A garden that roots out every wild flower will die in clean silence. There were gasps, there were snarls, there were held breaths. The guards tightened their ring, hands twitching near triggers. Lyra could feel the edge of action shimmering in the air. One wrong word, one wrong movement, and blood would paint the stone. The adjudicator raised both hands, and the plaza fell quiet again. We will not spill blood, he said. Not yet. We are not savages. We are perfect. We will show order through right. By ancient law, a trial of worth shall be called. The rejected will prove value or accept correction. The outsider may present evidence. If evidence exists, the verdict will be final. A ripple passed through the crowd like a shock wave. Trial of worth, the words were old. Heavy with forgotten dust and remembered fear, trials were not about truth. Trials were about power dressed in ceremony. Lyra felt it. Marcus saw it. The guards tasted it like metal on the tongue. The adjudicator pointed at Lyra. "Until the trial. You will be placed under observation," he said. "You will not leave the designated quarter. You will not broadcast your voice. You will not touch the outsider. Break this order, and you will be corrected." Marcus stepped once, not forward, but closer, to the line of guards. He did not raise a fist. He raised a question. "What is correction?" he asked, and the word sank like a stone. The adjudicator's smile sharpened. "Correction is mercy," he said. "Correction removes pain from the weak and inconvenience from the strong. Correction makes silence." A tremor ran through Lyra's bones, not from fear alone, but from rage held behind her teeth. She looked at the faces around her and saw many things. She saw scorn, she saw cowardice, and she saw cracks. A woman clutching a child looked away with wet eyes. An older artisan shifted his weight as if his feet wanted to move. A young guard swallowed twice and would not meet her gaze. Cracks in the wall that called itself perfect. The assembly ended with a chant forced by drums, "Order, order, order." The crowd repeated until their voices were hoarse, and still the word felt hollow. When the plaza emptied, Lyra was escorted to a narrow district near the old spires, stone. Rooms, metal doors, no windows that opened. "Observation," the guard said, and locked the latch. Night slid down like ink, slow and heavy. Footsteps paced outside, keys clinked, radios hissed. Lyra leaned against the cold wall and breathed through shaking lungs. She had faced the council at noon and had not broken, but darkness always tests what daylight promises. A soft click whispered at the door. A folded scrap slid under the seam like a quiet fish through water. She crouched and lifted it with careful fingers. The paper was rough. The words were quick. "I am Ro." It read, from the healer's quarter. "What they call correction is not mercy. It is burn and cut and erase. It is a clinic with no songs. It took my sister and returned to shell. You are not alone." Lyra's chest filled and ached at the same time. She pressed the note to her heart and closed her eyes. There were others who knew. There were others who remembered. The wall had more cracks than the banners could hide. Near midnight, another sound arrived, a soft tap on stone. She turned, pulse racing. A vent cover in the corner shifted. A shadow moved. A voice breathed her name, Lyra. She knew the voice even before the whisper found full shape. Marcus. He slid through the narrow gap with careful strength, his jacket torn, his hands dirty, his eyes bright and alive. For a heartbeat she only stared, shock and relief fighting in her throat. "How did you get past them?" she asked in a whisper that still ended with a comma. He smiled with a hint of pride and a lot of worry. "Humans are good at finding the spaces rules forget," he said. "Also, one guard believes rules are not the same as truth." He looked at the vent, then at her. "We do not have long." He sat beside her on the cold floor, close but not touching, honoring the risk and the boundary. "Listen," he said, "the trial is a stage, but stages can be turned. They will try to make you a symbol of disorder. We must make you a mirror instead. Show them themselves. Show them the cost of their law. We need proof, not just words." Lyra told him about the note, about Ro, about the clinic with no songs. Marcus's jaw tightened. His eyes sharpened like tools. "If we can get names, if we can get records," he said, "even a rumor with a human spine can stand up in a storm. But proof hides where fear sleeps." A faint scrape. Outside froze them both. Bootsteps paused. A key turned halfway, then stopped. Silence stretched, thin and dangerous. Lyra and Marcus did not breathe until the shadow moved on. "Time is small tonight," Marcus whispered. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thin band, dull and simple. "Wear this at the trial," he said. "On earth we give rings to promise, to anchor courage. This is not a ring from lovers. It is a ring from fighters." When you feel your voice shake, touch it, remember the oceans, remember the forests, remember every child who should not be cut into silence. Her hands trembled as she took the band. It was warm from his skin, and it felt like a key, not a key to a door, but to a choice. She slid it onto her finger, and the cold room seemed to grow 1 degree brighter. "I am afraid," she admitted, the words raw and honest. He nodded. "Fear means you understand the stakes," he said. "Courage is walking while afraid." He moved back to the vent, ready to vanish into the ducks and the night. Before he slipped away, he looked at her one last time. "They will try to break you with old words," he said. "You break them with new truth. I will find Roe. I will find the clinic. I will find the records if they exist. If they do not, I will find the people who carry the scars. At dawn, the drums will call. At noon, the stage will rise. At evening, Zayara will know what it worships." He was gone, a whisper swallowed by the vent in the dark. Lyra sat alone again, but the room was not the same room. Something had shifted, something had chosen. She touched the band and breathed, slow and steady. Outside, the city pulsed with ordered fear. Inside, a single heart learned how to keep time with defiance. When the first pale lines of morning brushed the stone, the latch clicked. Guards entered with stiff faces and formal voices. "Citizen Lyra," they said, "rise for transport to the Hall of Measure." She stood, and the floor did not tilt. She walked, and the corridor did not swallow her. She held the note in her memory. She held the band on her hand, and she held a picture in her mind. A clinic with no songs, a sister returned as a shell, a garden dying in perfect silence. The city awaited like a throat before a shout. Banners hung still in breathless air. Crowds gathered in circles within circles. The bells did not ring. The drums did not start. Not yet. For a moment, Zayara was quiet enough to hear a single step. Lyra took that step, and then another, and then another. Behind the walls, somewhere in the maze of vents and shadows, a human moved like a message that refused to be erased. The trial of worth was coming, and the backlash had only just begun. The Hall of Measure loomed like a mountain of glass and steel. Its doors stretched high enough to swallow towers. Its banners blazed with the sigil of perfection. Crowds swarmed in circles around it, their voices a sea of noise, half furious, half trembling with doubt. Every street leading to the hall was lined with guards, every rooftop shadowed by drones. The council wanted the city to watch, wanted. Every eye fixed on the rejected one and the human. A trial was theater, and the council had written the script. But scripts burn when voices change. Lyra walked between guards with her wrists bound in silver bands. They were not heavy, yet they burned like shame pressed into her skin. Her heart thundered, her steps shook, but the small band Marcus had given her was still on her finger. Every few steps she brushed it with her thumb. Remembering his words, "Courage is walking while afraid," the hall's interior was vast, shaped like a circle so that no corner could hide. Thousands filled the stands, their faces shadowed in half-light. Above them, the elders sat upon thrones of pale stone, elevated like gods. At the center was the stage, a platform of white crystal, glowing faintly as if alive. Here the accused would stand. Here the worth would be weighed. Marcus was already there, surrounded by guards, unchained yet closely watched. He looked at her the moment she entered. His gaze steady, his presence a shield. She felt her fear tighten, then ease like a rope loosened. She was not alone. The adjudicator raised his arms, his voice ringing across the hall. "Citizens of Zayara, today we cleanse doubt. A defect dares to stand equal. An outsider dares to speak of worth. They will be measured by right, and all will see the truth." The crowd roared, some in anger, some in anticipation, some only to silence their own fear. Lyra was led to the crystal platform, her body trembling. The surface shifted under her feet. reading her pulse, her breath, her blood. The council had always trusted machines to prove judgment, but machines only reflect the hands that built them. She thought of Marcus's words. A ruler that refuses to bend will snap. The adjudicator began. Step forward, Lyra of the lower spire. State your worth, or kneel to correction. Her throat closed, but she touched the band on her finger. Her voice shook, but it did not break. My worth is not for you to measure, she said. My worth is the breath I still take, the pain I have endured, the courage I hold. You call me broken, but I am still here, and that is enough. The crowd rippled, some gasping, some hissing, some clapping before they were silenced. The adjudicator sneered, his voice like cold iron. Words are wind, he said. We will see proof. He gestured to Marcus. Outsider, you claim her life holds value. Present your evidence. Marcus stepped forward, his hands empty, his voice calm. On Earth, we measure value not by bodies, but by choices. We honor those who fight, not those who fit. But I know words will not change your counsel, so I bring more. He lifted a small device, one the guards had failed to find. Its surface flickered, and suddenly the hall filled with a projection. Images of the clinic appeared, cold walls, silent. Rooms, beds lined with motionless figures. Ziari citizens with empty eyes, their voices erased, their bodies alive but hollow. Correction, gasps tore through the crowd, sharp and wild. A woman in the stand screamed, clutching her mouth. That is my brother, she cried, her voice shattering the silence. Others rose, pointing, whispering names. Recognizing faces thought dead or vanished. The hall quaked with voices, anger, horror, disbelief. The adjudicator slammed his staff, his voice thundering, lies, fabrications, tricks of alien machines. But his words were drowned by the cries of the people. They had seen too much. They could not unsee. Marcus's voice rose, carrying through the chaos. You call it mercy, but it is mutilation. You call it perfection, but it is fear. This woman, rejected by your measure, carries the courage you lack. She is more whole than your counsel, more worthy than your throne. The crowd roared, some shouting his name, some shouting hers. Lyra felt her chest swell with something fierce and unshakable, hope. She stepped forward, raising her voice above. The storm, you told me I was broken, she cried. But it is not me who is broken. It is you. Every child you silenced, every voice you cut away, every truth you buried. That is the rot in your perfection. The crystal beneath her feet pulsed. Confused by the force of her voice, the hall shook. With sound, not from machines but from people, the guards hesitated, their hands unsure, their faces pale. For the first time, the council looked uncertain. But power never dies quietly. The adjudicator's eyes burned with fury. Enough, he roared. Seize them, both of them. End this poison before it spreads. Guards surged forward, weapons glowing. The crowd screamed, some rushing to flee, some trying to push closer. Lyra's pulse raced. Marcus's stance hardened. This was the breaking point, the moment where chains either snap or tighten forever. And then, a voice cut through the chaos. Sharp as lightning, stop. Every head turned. The hall froze. From the upper stands, a figure rose, cloaked in healer's robes. It was Ro, the one who had sent the note. Her hands shook, but her voice was iron. I was inside the clinic, she shouted. I saw what correction does. They took my sister. They cut her voice. They left her breathing but gone. This is not mercy. It is murder. Gasps tore through the hall, louder than before. Others rose, shouting names, shouting stories. A chorus of grief and rage, unstoppable now. The guards faltered, looking to the council for orders. The council's masks of calm cracked. Marcus leaned close to Lyra, his voice low but fierce. This is it, he whispered. Truth has broken their script. Now they will choose desperation. Be ready. The adjudicator's face twisted, his voice shaking with rage. If the people will not silence themselves, then we will silence the people. He hissed. He raised his staff. A crystal core glowing like fire. The platform shook. The lights dimmed. Power surged through the hall. A weapon disguised as judgment. The crowd screamed. Guards staggered. The walls trembled. Lyra's breath caught. Marcus's hand gripped hers. This was not a trial anymore. It was war dressed in law. The hall of measure cracked with light and fury. The adjudicator's staff blazed, spilling power into the air like fire through dry grass. The crystal platform beneath Lyra's feet trembled, threatening to split. People screamed, rushing to the exits, but the doors sealed with iron locks. The council had turned judgment into a cage, a trap for all. This was not order. This was war against truth. Marcus pulled Lyra close, shielding her with his body. The heat of the crystal burned his boots, but he did not move. Guards lifted their weapons, hesitation flickering in their eyes. They had sworn loyalty to the council, but their hearts beat like every other heart in the hall. And hearts, once cracked, cannot be patched with fear. Rose's voice rose above the chaos, fierce and breaking. See what they are. See what they do. She cried. They would burn us to protect their lie. Her words cut like blades, carried by pain too deep to be denied. The crowd's fear bent into rage, voices rising, fists slamming against the locked doors. The hall was no longer silent. It roared like a storm. The adjudicator slammed his staff. Again, silence. He roared, his face twisted in fury. You are children. You are blind. You will obey. But the words fell hollow, drowned in the cries of thousands. His perfection was cracking, and cracks never mend under fire. Marcus stepped forward, pulling Lyra with him, his voice rising steady and strong. You call yourselves perfect, but perfection built on fear is only rot, he thundered. You tried to erase her, but she stands. You tried to silence her, but she speaks. You tried to bury the truth, but it rises tonight. He raised their joined hands high, a simple band on her finger catching the glow of the crystals. This woman is worth more than your entire throne, he said, because she is real. The people roared, 1,000. Voices breaking chains in a single breath. Some guards dropped their weapons, stepping back in shame. Others turned their blades away from Marcus and Lyra, unsure where loyalty now lived. The adjudicator's fury burned hotter. If the people betray their rulers, then the people will be corrected. He screamed. The staff flared, a beam of white fire rushing toward the crowd. Time slowed, hearts stopped, but Lyra moved, faster than her fear. She stepped in front of Marcus, raising her hands though they were bound. The crystal beneath her pulsed wildly. Sensing her defiance, the beam struck the platform, and light exploded, not in destruction, but in reflection. The energy scattered, racing through the hall's walls and banners. The symbols of perfection blazed, then shattered. Like glass, the power turned back on itself. Striking the council's throne, elders screamed, shields cracking, robes burning. The adjudicator staggered, his staff flickering, his voice choked with rage. This is corruption. He spat, but his words were drowned in the storm of rebellion. The people surged forward, breaking the guard lines. Shouts filled the hall. No more correction. No more silence. The doors burst open, torn apart by the force of many hands. Light from the city spilled inside, and the hall no longer belonged to the council. It belonged to the people. Marcus grabbed Lyra's bonds, snapping them loose. With a stolen blade, her wrists burned, but her arms felt light for the first time. She turned to him, eyes wide with shock and fire. You could have let me fall, she whispered. He shook his head, his voice steady. I didn't come here to let you fall, Lyra. I came here because I saw a queen in the ashes. Her breath caught, tears rising unbidden. She had never been called anything but broken. But now, before the eyes of her people, she was seen, truly seen. The council tried one last time, their voices shrieking for obedience, but no one listened. Guards who once obeyed stood down. Healers cried the names of the silenced. Children shouted louder than drums. The adjudicator raised his staff once more, desperate, but before he could strike, the people surged upon him. The staff fell, shattering against the stone. The throne cracked. The banners burned, and the old order collapsed under its own lies when the chaos finally eased. The hall was filled not with silence, but with voices. People stood together, shaken, bruised, yet alive with something new, hope. They looked to Marcus, the outsider who had spoken truths their own would not, and they looked to Lyra, the rejected one who had stood when all told her to kneel. Whispers spread, not of shame, but of honor. Her name carried not as insult, but as promise. In the days that followed, the council's survivors were stripped of power. The clinics were broken open. The silence were cared for. And in the center of it all stood Lyra, once a defect, now a symbol of change. The people gathered not by command, but by choice. They crowned her not with gold, but with trust, not with jewels, but with voices that called her leader. One evening, under the twin moons, she stood with Marcus at the edge of the city. Stars stretched wide, the wind was soft. The scars of the hall still smoldered behind them. She turned to him, her voice unsteady but strong. They rejected me. They said I was unfit, she whispered. But you made me feel like a queen. Marcus smiled, his eyes gentle but fierce. You were always a queen, Lyra, he said. All I did was remind you. She touched the band on her finger, the simple band that had carried her through fear. It was not a crown, but it was more, because it was a promise that she would never again bow to chains, that she would never again call herself broken, that she would stand as a queen not of perfection, but of defiance. The city behind her whispered with new voices. The stars before her promised new horizons, and at her side, a human who had seen her when no one else did, the universe stretched wide and dangerous. But she was no longer afraid, because she had learned the greatest truth of all. Worth was never given. Worth was claimed, and once claimed, it could never be stolen again.